For 31 years, I believed I had the perfect marriage. My wife, Helen, was the woman I had loved since college. We had built a life together, 3 beautiful children, a lovely home, and a lifetime of shared experiences. To the outside world, we were the embodiment of a successful, happy couple. Friends envied us, colleagues respected us, and even our children believed they had the best parents in the world. I, too, believed that. Until the cracks began to show. It started subtly, so subtly that I almost convinced myself I was imagining things. Helen had always been warm and attentive, but recently, she had become more distant. The affectionate glances, the stolen kisses in the kitchen, the late-night laughter over a glass of wine, all of it had begun to fade. At first, I chalked it up to age and routine. After all, 31 years of marriage wasn't a fairy tale. Life had its ups and downs. But something about her changed. She started spending more time on her phone, always angling the screen away when I was near. Her weekend outings, which used to be casual trips to the store or visits with friends, became longer and more frequent. She began dressing up more often, wearing perfume that I hadn't smelled in years. She claimed it was just a desire to feel good about herself again, but something in my gut told me otherwise. Then came the nights when she was too tired for intimacy. At first, I accepted it. We weren't newlyweds anymore. But when it became the norm rather than the exception, I started wondering. The worst part? She wasn't just uninterested, she seemed relieved when I didn't initiate. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that she had been nothing but loyal for over 3 decades. But doubt has a way of gnawing at you, sinking into your bones like an unshakable chill. The little things started adding up. A call she refused to answer when I was in the room. A mysterious charge on our credit card for a hotel she had no explanation for. A strange message that flashed across her phone before she quickly swiped it away. And then, the moment that made my blood run cold. One night, Helen was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She had never been overly protective of it before, but now she took it everywhere, even to the bathroom. But that night, she had left it behind. The screen lit up with a message. "Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you." I felt my stomach drop. My hands trembled as I stared at the words, my heart pounding against my ribs. A lump formed in my throat, and for the first time in my life, I felt the sharp sting of betrayal. This wasn't just paranoia. This wasn't just my imagination. Helen was cheating. I had spent 3 decades building a life with a woman I thought I knew. But in that moment, standing in the dim glow of her phone screen, I realized something terrifying. I had been living in a lie. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I made a decision. I was going to gather every piece of evidence, secure my assets, and make sure that when I finally exposed her, she wouldn't see it coming. I would not be the fool she thought I was. The moment I saw that message, something inside me snapped. For 31 years, I had trusted Helen with everything, my love, my loyalty, my future. But now, all I could feel was a gnawing sense of betrayal. I wanted to storm into the bathroom, demand answers, throw the phone in her face and make her confess. But something stopped me. Confrontation wouldn't solve anything. Not yet. If Helen was cheating, she had likely been doing it for a while. She had covered her tracks this long, which meant she had become good at deception. If I accused her without proof, she would lie, twist the story, and make me doubt my own sanity. No, I needed to be patient. If I was going to uncover the truth, I had to be smart. I placed the phone back on the nightstand, exactly as it was, and forced myself to act normal. When she stepped out of the bathroom, a towel wrapped around her body, steam rising from her skin, she flashed me a smile, the same smile she had given me for decades. And for the first time, I questioned whether it had ever been real. "Everything okay?" she asked, drying her hair. I swallowed the bitterness in my throat and nodded. Yeah, just thinking about work. She didn't press further. She had stopped caring about my long work hours a long time ago. That, too, should have been a sign. That night, I lay beside her in bed, staring at the ceiling while she slept soundly, as if she carried no guilt. My mind raced with possibilities. Who was he? How long had it been going on? How many times had she looked me in the eye, kissed me goodbye, and then gone straight into another man's arms? I needed answers. The investigation begins. The next morning, Helen acted like nothing had changed. She hummed while making coffee, kissed my cheek as I left for work, and even texted me during the day as if we were the same loving couple we had always been. I played along. But the moment I got to the office, I called an old friend, Mark, a private investigator. He was someone I had met years ago through business dealings, and I knew he was good at his job. "Mark, I need your help," I said when he answered. There was a pause before he responded. "You sound serious. What's going on?" "My wife is having an affair. I need to know with who, for how long, and I need proof." Mark exhaled. "Are you sure?" I saw the message with my own eyes. That was all he needed to hear. "All right. I'll start today. I'll need her schedule, when she leaves, where she usually goes, and any suspicions you have." I provided every detail I could. Her weekend outings, her gym sessions, the unexplained late nights. Mark assured me he would be discreet. Meanwhile, I started my own investigation. I went through bank statements, looking for transactions that didn't add up. I checked hotel bookings, restaurant bills, and even scanned her social media for any clues. That's when I found another red flag. One of her frequent contacts was a name I didn't recognize, Richard M. He had liked almost every picture she had posted in the last 2 years. Harmless enough, except Helen never mentioned him. And she had commented on his posts too, inside jokes, teasing remarks, things that now seemed like a secret language between them. I clicked on his profile. His pictures showed a man in his 50s, fit, well-dressed, and from the looks of it, successful. He wasn't a stranger to my wife. He was a hidden part of her world. I felt the first rush of anger. How long had she been fooling me? But anger wouldn't help me now. I had to stay calm. The first break in the case. 2 days later, Mark called me. "She met someone at a hotel yesterday," he said. "Same guy, Richard M." I got pictures. My stomach churned. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was real. "Send them to me," I said, my voice tight. Minutes later, my phone vibrated. I opened the images, and there it was, Helen, my wife of 31 years, standing in the lobby of a 5-star hotel, laughing with a man I had never met. Then another picture, her hand resting on his arm, the kind of touch that wasn't innocent. The final image shattered me. Helen and Richard, entering a hotel suite together. I clenched my jaw, my grip tightening around the phone. She had no idea that I knew. No idea that her carefully built lie was crumbling. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think rationally. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was about my future, my assets, and how I would end this on my terms. It was time to start securing everything I had worked for. And when the time was right, I would expose her for who she really was. The moment I saw those pictures, something inside me shifted. The grief was there, yes, but it no longer controlled me. I had loved Helen for over 3 decades, but the woman in those images, the one who laughed so freely with another man, who walked hand in hand into a hotel suite, she was not my wife anymore. I had 2 choices: confront her immediately and give her the chance to manipulate the truth, or continue gathering evidence, securing my future, and ensuring that when I finally struck, there would be no escape for her. I chose the latter. Laying the trap. The first thing I did was meet with my lawyer, Paul Whitmore, a no-nonsense divorce attorney I had known for years. I told him everything, showing him the pictures and laying out my suspicions. Paul leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "You've been married for 31 years. If this goes to court without a solid plan, she could take half, maybe more. We need to be smart about this." I nodded. "That's why I'm here. What do I need to do?" Paul steepled his fingers. "First, do not confront her yet. Keep acting normal. The more comfortable she feels, the sloppier she'll get. Meanwhile, we'll start moving your assets into safer territory. Investments, properties, savings, you need to make sure she doesn't get her hands on them." I had built a successful business from the ground up, and my net worth was significant. The thought of Helen walking away with half of it after betraying me made my blood boil. "I also recommend setting up a separate account," Paul continued. "Move liquid funds slowly so she doesn't notice. And start keeping track of all her suspicious activities. The more proof we have, the better your chances in court." I left his office with a plan and a renewed sense of control. This was no longer about heartbreak. It was about strategy. Following the money. Over the next week, I followed Paul's advice meticulously. I combed through our joint financial accounts, looking for anything that stood out. That's when I found it, $15,000 withdrawn in the last 3 months. Helen had always had access to our money, but she wasn't a big spender. This was unusual. Where was that money going? Mark, my private investigator, was still tracking her. When I told him about the missing funds, he promised to look deeper. She might be supporting him, he suggested. Affairs aren't just about sex. Sometimes, it's about power, control, and even money. Maybe she's been paying for Richard's lifestyle. The thought sickened me. I had spent 31 years providing for this woman, only for her to take my hard-earned money and give it to another man. I needed more proof. Helen had been careful, but even the best liars make mistakes. One evening, as she was in the shower, I noticed she had left her phone on the dresser. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed it, quickly scrolling through her recent messages. Most of them were normal, chats with our children, group conversations with her friends. But then I found the hidden folder in her messaging app. My heart pounded as I opened it. "Richard, I can't wait to see you again. Last night was unforgettable. Helen, I miss you already. Next weekend can't come soon enough." The bile rose in my throat. Next weekend? That meant their affair was still ongoing. Then, a second message came in. From him. Right in front of me. "Richard, did he suspect anything? You were amazing tonight." I barely stopped myself from crushing the phone in my hands. The rage was white-hot, nearly uncontrollable. But I forced myself to breathe. This was exactly what I needed, proof straight from her own fingers. I took pictures of the messages with my own phone before carefully placing hers back. She would never know that I knew. Not yet. Now that I had the evidence, it was time to take the final steps before I revealed the truth. Secure assets. I quietly moved a large portion of my savings into a private account. I also contacted my business partners, ensuring that Helen had no legal claim over my company. Changed the will. Helen had been the sole beneficiary of my estate. That changed. I rewrote my will, ensuring that everything would go to my children instead. More surveillance. I instructed Mark to follow her closely over the next week. If she was planning another meeting with Richard, I wanted every detail captured. And then, the moment I had been waiting for arrived. Mark called me one evening, his voice urgent. "She's meeting him again this Saturday. Same hotel." I closed my eyes, letting the weight of the moment sink in. "Book me a room in the same hotel," I said, my voice steady. This was it. The moment I would finally face her. But I wouldn't do it alone. I would bring the evidence. The pictures. The financial records. The messages. And I would expose her in a way she would never forget. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and now it was time to execute my plan. The betrayal still burned, but I refused to let emotions dictate my actions. This had to be handled with precision. Saturday arrived faster than I expected. Helen left the house in the late afternoon, dressed in a sleek black dress I hadn't seen before. She sprayed a little extra perfume, checked her reflection twice in the mirror, and grabbed her purse. "Going out with the girls?" I asked casually. She smiled, not a hint of guilt in her expression. "Yeah, dinner and maybe a little shopping after." I nodded. "Have fun." I watched her walk out, wondering how she could lie so effortlessly. As soon as her car disappeared down the street, I grabbed my overnight bag and left for the hotel. Mark had already booked my room, 2 floors above Helen's. He had also set up hidden cameras in the hallway near their suite. Every move they made would be recorded. I checked in under an alias and made my way to the hotel bar, where I had a clear view of the entrance. My heart pounded in my chest when I saw them arrive. Helen entered first, her posture relaxed, her smile wide. Richard followed closely behind, his hand brushing the small of her back. They laughed, whispered, completely unaware that their world was about to collapse. Mark had stationed himself in the lobby, pretending to be a guest. He sent me a text, "They're heading up now. Cameras are rolling." I waited exactly 15 minutes before making my move. I walked through the lobby, acting like any other guest, took the elevator to their floor, and made my way to their suite. And then, with calm precision, I knocked. There was silence for a few seconds. Then footsteps approached. The door opened slightly, and Helen peeked out. The moment she saw me, her face lost all color. "Paul," she stammered, gripping the door as if that could stop me from entering. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Richard was in the room, sitting on the edge of the bed, his shirt half unbuttoned. His expression shifted from confusion to alarm as he realized who I was. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, standing up. I turned to Helen. "Aren't you going to introduce us, darling?" My voice was eerily calm. Helen looked like she wanted to disappear. "Paul, this isn't." "Save it," I cut in. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder of evidence. "Would you like to see what I know? Or should I just let Richard here tell me everything?" Richard shifted uncomfortably. "Look, man, I didn't know." "You didn't know she was married?" I laughed bitterly. "Try again." Helen stepped forward, reaching for my arm. "Paul, please, let's talk about this privately." I pulled away. "Privately? Like how you sneaked around behind my back? Like how you lied to my face for God knows how long?" Tears welled in her eyes, but they had no effect on me anymore. I turned to Richard. "Since you're so comfortable sleeping with another man's wife, let me introduce myself properly. I'm Paul Carter, her husband of 31 years. The man who built a life with her. The man who sacrificed everything for this marriage. And now, the man who's about to make sure she walks away with nothing." Richard paled. He probably thought he was messing around with a woman in a troubled marriage. Now, he realized he had stepped into a war zone. I took a step closer to him. "You should probably get dressed and leave before I ruin your life too. Because after tonight, everyone is going to know who you are." He hesitated, looking at Helen, then at me. Then, like the coward he was, he grabbed his shirt and left without another word. As soon as the door closed, Helen collapsed onto the bed, sobbing. "Paul, please, Don't," I said coldly. "Don't insult me with apologies." She looked up, her mascara smudged, her body shaking. "I never wanted to hurt you." I laughed bitterly. "But you did. Over and over again. You didn't think I would find out. You thought you could live two lives, lie to my face, and I'd never notice. She had no response. She only sobbed harder. I took a deep breath. I didn't come here to hear excuses. I came here to tell you how this ends. We're getting a divorce. My lawyer will be serving you papers on Monday. Her eyes widened in panic. Paul, please, don't do this. We can fix this. Fix this? I shook my head in disbelief. Do you even hear yourself? 31 years, Helen. 31 years. And this is how you repay me? She grabbed my hands. I don't want to lose you. I pulled away. You lost me the moment you chose him. I turned and walked toward the door. But before leaving, I looked back one last time. You should start packing. Because after this, you won't have a home to come back to. And with that, I walked away, leaving behind the woman I had once loved, the woman I no longer recognized. I walked out of that hotel room and never looked back. My heart was pounding, my fists clenched, but I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. The moment I stepped outside, Mark was waiting for me in his car. I slid into the passenger seat, exhaling sharply. How did it go? He asked. As expected, I said, my voice calm but firm. She cried, begged, but it's over. She knows what's coming. Mark nodded. Good. You did what you had to do. I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past us. I had built a life with Helen for 31 years, and in just one night, I had ended it. Now, it was time to finish what I started. The next morning, I met with Paul, my lawyer, in his office. Everything went as planned? He asked, scanning my expression. Better than planned, I said. I confronted them at the hotel. She knows what's coming. Paul smirked. That's good. Now, let's talk strategy. He handed me the divorce documents. We're filing on grounds of infidelity. Given the overwhelming evidence we have, photos, messages, financial records, this case is in our favor. I nodded. I want her out of my house. And I don't want her walking away with a cent more than she deserves. Paul tapped his pen on the table. We can fight for that. The fact that you gathered evidence first was smart. If she tries to claim half of your assets, we'll challenge it. Judges don't take kindly to cheating spouses. I leaned forward. And the house? Paul smirked. Since it's in your name and you purchased it before the marriage, she has no automatic right to it. We'll ensure she's legally forced to leave. That was all I needed to hear. File the papers, I said. Let's end this. That evening, I returned home. Helen was sitting in the living room, her face pale and puffy from crying. She looked up as I entered, hope flashing in her eyes. Paul, can we talk? She asked softly. I set down my briefcase and crossed my arms. There's nothing left to talk about. She stood up, walking toward me cautiously. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But 31 years, Paul. Does that mean nothing to you? I let out a bitter chuckle. It used to mean everything. Until I found out you had been sleeping with another man behind my back. Her lips trembled. I swear, it didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. I was lonely, I was. I cut her off. Don't. Just don't. You weren't lonely, Helen. You were selfish. You made a choice, and now you're going to live with the consequences. She swallowed hard. Please, don't do this. I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our home. You should have thought about that before you walked into a hotel with him, I said coldly. I pulled the divorce papers from my briefcase and placed them on the table. These will be served to you officially tomorrow. But I'm giving you the courtesy of seeing them now. Her hands shook as she picked up the papers, scanning the contents. Her face paled. You're kicking me out of the house. It's my house, I said simply. You have 1 week to move out. Tears streamed down her face. Paul, please. Where am I supposed to go? I shrugged. Maybe Richard has a spare room. She gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. You're really doing this? I'm done, Helen, I said, my voice firm. I deserve better than this. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving her sobbing behind me. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The house was no longer a home. It was a battlefield. Helen had stopped begging. Instead, she had become angry, defiant, and unpredictable. I had expected resistance, but I hadn't expected her to fight this hard to stay. The morning after I gave her the divorce papers, I walked into the kitchen to find her sitting at the table, sipping coffee like nothing had changed. She glanced at me over the rim of her cup. I'm not leaving. I leaned against the counter, unfazed. You don't have a choice, Helen. She set her mug down and crossed her arms. This house is just as much mine as it is yours. I spent 31 years building a life here. You spent those 31 years lying to my face, I shot back. And you don't own a single piece of this house. It's in my name. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the tiles. I don't care what's in your name, Paul. I built this life with you. You can't just throw me out like garbage. I let out a bitter chuckle. Funny. That's exactly how you treated our marriage. Her face turned red with anger. You're punishing me because I made a mistake. Because I was weak. No, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I'm holding you accountable for betraying me. There's a difference. She clenched her fists. I will fight this divorce. I'll make sure I get half of everything. I stepped closer, my voice dropping. Go ahead. Fight. But you'll lose. I have all the evidence, Helen. The photos, the texts, the credit card transactions. The courts won't be on your side. Her eyes flickered with fear, but she quickly masked it. We'll see about that. By that afternoon, the phone calls started. Helen had clearly told her side of the story to anyone who would listen. First, it was my sister, Lisa. Paul, don't you think you're being a little too harsh? I sighed. Lisa, she cheated on me. For years. I know, but 31 years is a long time to just throw away. I didn't throw it away, I cut in. She did. Silence. Then a sigh. I just don't want you to regret this. I won't. Then came the calls from mutual friends. Some took my side. Others tried to guilt me into forgiving her. None of it mattered. I had made my decision. Helen's last desperate move. That evening, I came home to find Helen waiting for me in the living room. She wasn't crying. She wasn't yelling. She was dressed in the same red dress she wore on our honeymoon. Let's talk, she said softly. I narrowed my eyes. Talk about what? She took a deep breath and walked toward me. I know I made mistakes. But I still love you, Paul. I don't want this to end. I scoffed. Now you want to fix this? She reached for my hand, her fingers trembling. We've built a life together. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you. I pulled my hand away. You lost me the moment you chose him. Tears filled her eyes. Can't we go back? Before everything went wrong. I stared at her, at the woman I had once loved more than anything. And I felt nothing. No, I said simply. We can't. Her lips quivered. Then what am I supposed to do? I grabbed my briefcase and headed toward the stairs. That's not my problem anymore. As I walked away, I heard her collapse onto the couch, sobbing. But I didn't turn back. Because this time, I was done. The morning after Helen's failed attempt to seduce me, I received a call from my lawyer, Paul. She's fighting back, he said without preamble. She's filed a counter-petition, claiming emotional abuse and financial manipulation. I let out a humorless laugh. Unbelievable. Paul sighed. It's a classic move. When a cheating spouse has no defense, they try to paint themselves as the victim. But don't worry, we have more than enough evidence to crush this. I clenched my jaw. I want this over as soon as possible. We'll move fast, but divorces take time. She's stalling to stay in the house longer. That hit a nerve. Every night, I had to come home to her. Every night, we lived like two strangers in a war zone, pretending the other didn't exist. I wasn't going to let her drag this out. What's our next move? I asked. We file a motion to have her removed from the house. Based on our evidence and the fact that the property is in your name, we have a strong case. I smirked. Then do it. Helen's false accusations. Later that evening, I came home to find Helen sitting in the dining room with a smug look on her face. I spoke to my lawyer today, she said casually. I tossed my keys onto the table. Good for you. She smirked. He thinks I have a strong case. For what? I asked, crossing my arms. She stood and walked toward me, lowering her voice. For abuse. I raised an eyebrow. Excuse me. Her lips curled into a fake pout. Paul, I was a devoted wife for 31 years, and you neglected me. You controlled all the finances, kept me dependent on you, and now you want to throw me away like trash. I clenched my fists. That's a lie, and you know it. She shrugged. Maybe. But how will a judge see it? I took a slow, deliberate step toward her. You can twist the truth all you want, Helen, but facts don't lie. I have bank statements proving I gave you full access to our finances. I have text messages and photos proving you cheated. And if you want to talk about emotional abuse, maybe we should discuss how you spent the last few years sneaking around behind my back. I leaned in closer, my voice cold. You will lose. For the first time since our confrontation, fear flickered in her eyes. She turned away abruptly. We'll see about that. A week later, Paul called me with the news I had been waiting for. The judge granted our motion, he said. Helen has 10 days to vacate the house. Relief washed over me. She's not going to take this well, I said. Paul chuckled. I expect fireworks. But legally, she's out. That evening, when I walked into the house, Helen was standing in the living room with a piece of paper in her hand. You're kicking me out, she shrieked. I set my briefcase down calmly. No, the court is. Tears filled her eyes. Paul, where am I supposed to go? I shrugged. Maybe Richard has a spare room. She let out a choked sob. You really hate me that much? I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. No, Helen. I just don't love you anymore. And with that, I walked past her, leaving her standing there, shattered and defeated.